colleagues, and good morning, any members of the public listening in. Thank you very much for logging in to this Zoom video conference meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee. My name is John Turner. I'm the Democratic Services Officer for this meeting, and I'm assisted by my colleague, Kate Sheldon, who is the host of the virtual meeting. The meeting is a public meeting and in alignment with the new regulations which permit meetings to be held by remote means will be live streamed for the public to view. To enable the meeting to run as smoothly as possible, can I please ask that participants in the virtual meeting room leave your microphones on mute unless you're wanting to speak, and indicate so to the chair by a show of hand or by a private message, whichever you feel comfortable with. One final issue for members of the public: you may see members and officers looking to the left and right of their screens during the meeting. They're not being distracted in any way. They're merely looking at paperwork on other devices. I'll now hand you over to the chair of this meeting, Councillor Mick Rooney.
Thank you very much, John. I do hope that there are some people, members of the public, actually watching us this morning. And for their benefit, I think we will go around the screen in front of me in no particular order other than the one that I am seeing them in, and we'll have people introduce themselves. And I am going to start with the host, Kate.
Morning, I'm Kate Sheldon, Member Support and Civic Manager. Thank you.
And I am Councillor Mick Rooney. I'm chair of this meeting and I represent Woodhouse Ward. Jim.
Jim Stanky, Councillor for Netheridge and Sharrow.
Julie.
Morning everyone, I'm Councillor Julie Growcoat for Stocksbridge and Upper Ward.
And Tim.
I'm Councillor Tim Hogan and I'm Councillor for Crooks and Crosspool.
Thank you. Mark.
I'm Councillor Mark Jones and I'm attending as Cabinet Member for the Environment, Street Scene and Climate Change.
Victoria, nice to see you again.
Hi, I'm Victoria Penman. I'm an Economic Policy Officer.
Sinead.
I'm Councillor Sinead Meyer-Richards, Councillor for Manor and Castle.
Mark W.
Thank you. I'm Mark Whitworth. I'm Service Manager for Sustainability and Climate Change.
Alice.
I'm Alice Nicholson. I'm Policy and Improvement Officer who supports this particular committee.
John.
Morning, I'm John Turner. I'm the Democratic Services Officer.
Denise.
Morning, Councillor Denise Fox, Councillor for Burley Ward.
Mike.
Morning, Councillor Mike Levery, Councillor for West Ecclesfield.
Ian.
Councillor Ian Auckland, Councillor for Graves Park Ward. Good morning.
Good morning. Steve.
Good morning, I'm Steve Harris. I'm also Councillor for Graves Park Ward.
Alison.
Yep. Good morning, Alison Teal, Councillor for Netheridge and Sharrow and standing in for Douglas Johnson, City Ward.
Thank you very much. Kate.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Kate MacDonald from Gleadless Valley Ward.
I have Rachel Hand. Are you one of the, forgive me, are you one of the questioners?
Yes, I'm one of the questioners. I'm representing Sheffield Climate Alliance.
Good morning to you and welcome. And Rebecca Atkinson, I'm assuming you are a questioner also.
Yep, that's correct.
Good morning to you as well. Right, that's that. There shouldn't be any housekeeping arrangements. I mean, if you want to sort of tidy up and dust a bit later, that's up to yourselves. Apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair, I've had an apology from Councillor Douglas Johnson with Councillor Alison Teal subbing, and we understand that Councillor Ben Curran will be attending the meeting later.
Thank you very much. Exclusion of press and public. I'm not aware of any reason to do that, John, no?
No items, Chair, no.
Okay. Declarations of interest. Tim.
I declare, because there's a report coming to committee from the Green City Partnership Board, and I'm a member of that board as a councillor.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Alison.
Same thing. I'm also a member of the Green City Partnership Board.
Thank you very much. I can't see anybody else raising their hands. While we're at it, in terms of attracting my attention during the meeting, if we could use the chat facility, please. That's easier for me to keep track of, that's all. And I will call people in order as they appear on the chat, whatever it is, list. Right, now we're on to minutes of the previous meeting, which I am trying to find on my other machine. Could we first of all agree them as a reasonable record of what was said and done last time, please?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much. And now I'm going to go through matters arising page by page. My page starts at 9, so I'm going to do 9. Okay. Anything on 9? 10? 11? Anything, anyone? 12? 13? Anyone? No. 14? Well, where's that going? Oh, excuse me, my apparatus is rather sensitive to touch, and it's just gone on about 40 pages. I'm trying to rapidly reel it back. Where have we got? Here we go. Page 14, I think we were up to. 15. I think we have met up. Alice, you'll have to remind me. Did we meet up as chairs and vice chairs?
No.
I don't think you managed to meet. No, we didn't manage to get that together for various sort of leave commitments.
Okay.
But I will say that one of the things in there is about the number of meetings. Since then, we've got a pretty full-on now schedule of meetings for all scrutiny committees. Right. I mean, obviously over to the chairs of individual committees if there are still concerns, but I think we've got pretty robust work programs in the offing for all of the scrutiny committees. Okay. I just want to say that. I think in terms of getting chairs together, yes, we will still try that for some time in December.
Okay, all right, but we are functioning more or less at full capacity in terms of scrutiny meetings at the moment.
From my perspective, yes? As a scrutiny officer, yes.
Right.
If chairs have other views, that's the chair's prerogative. But I do feel the three of us who support scrutiny do feel that we've got a reasonable schedule of meetings now and items on agendas that are kind of relevant right now, not just COVID, but other issues too.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And I think that's the end of those minutes, I believe. Right. I think now we're on to public questions and petitions. And now I've got to start fiddling about trying to find those. Here we go. I think I've got them. It's Rebecca Atkinson. There we are. You are first. Right, Rebecca, away you go.
Thank you. So I have reached into 3 different subject areas. Yes. The first one is about the Citizens' Assembly. So the Citizens' Assembly was agreed to in June 2019, and it had cross-party support. Given the urgent scale of the actions required to address the climate emergency, particularly given the Tyndall Centre report, which was kind of came out at the same time, it was already quite delayed before the COVID-19 pandemic occurred. So to successfully introduce decarbonisation policies, buy-in from communities is also really important. So I just wondered what evidence and consultation was gathered to support the decision to cancel the Citizens' Assembly, given the availability of sophisticated communication software that we are using now.
Do you want to take them one at a time, Mark? I think given the nature of that some of them are actually quite in-depth
okay.
in-depth questions and are on different subject matters. Do you want to take them one at a time? Yeah. Okay.
So if
Mark,
we could answer that one, and then I'll ask the next. That's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Mark or Mark?
I'll take this one. Consultation on cancelling. There has been no consultation on cancelling because we haven't cancelled. It's as simple as it is. We have delayed because of, as you rightly say, the COVID context that we find ourselves in. So in March's council meeting, in the budget setting meeting of this year, we received funding from the council to host a citizens' assembly and to drive forward the net zero ambitions of this council to achieve the 2030 target that's been set. At that stage, having got the funding, we set about working to set the citizens' assembly running. Now, prior to that, we'd gone to the Green City Partnership Board, which we reconvened the previous year, and I'd taken permission from that board to engage members of that board in February to act as a steering committee to help us guide that process going forward. Obviously, then COVID hit in March, and that sideswiped us. And at that stage, I took the decision, an executive decision, that I did not believe it would have been appropriate, it would not have been inclusive, it would not have been timely for us to look to set up an assembly and push that agenda on. Now we have done preliminary work. In the meantime, the government has reported back on its citizens' assembly, and we have continued to do our work to address this issue. As you rightly say, and I think it's not just my assertion, I think this is a statement of fact. Climate change is happening. Climate change is real. Climate change needs to be addressed. The Citizens' Assembly will give us buy-in from the public. It will act as a tool to engage and promote the awareness of climate change. But we cannot wait for an assembly to deliver outcomes. So we have continued to do work, including the commissioning of reports and baseline and gap analysis that we'll be speaking to today. So though it feels that the Citizens' Assembly, or some may say that it's been cancelled, that is simply not true. We will look to bring it. And one thing that I'd like to highlight, Rebecca, is the Citizens' Assembly has to be the voices of everybody. If it was a case of having the voices of just the experts, well, they've spoken. We know the challenge ahead of us. It's what our city feels is right for it and what our city can bear. And it's got to be the voices of everybody, not just those with a vested interest. So the reason that I've paused is I don't want to particularly waste public money setting up an assembly and then delaying it. I also don't want to go through the extensive and rigorous process of recruiting members of the public to that board, only to find that it delayed and they fall off and then we have to restart all again. I'm not sure the uncertainties that the COVID context has given would actually help us do that. Could we do it electronically? Yes. However, I believe that it would be very, very difficult to allow everyone to participate equally. Digital divide across our society is terrible. It is truly horrendous. When you were asking your question, your question was breaking up. I could just about make out what you're hearing, what you're saying. But imagine doing an assembly in an evening where with a single parent in a 1-bedroom flat and the children's running around in the background screaming. How are they supposed to participate in that process? It's not possible. So to be as inclusive and as pertinent and as relevant as it needs to be, and others have said this to me that have run this from Bear Project that are based in Sheffield, that were involved in running the Leeds Citizens Jury, to others wider afield. The assembly has to be face to face so that people can have the time to sit down, build those relationships, build that understanding, and come together so we can get a meaningful outcome from it. Because more than anything, we need the assembly to be meaningful and ambitious. So though it feels that it's been cancelled, that is far from the case, and I hope that answers your question. Thank you, Chair.
Mark, can I just interject? I mean, Rebecca is not the only person, I think, that thinks that the Citizens' Assembly may well have been either cancelled or abandoned. I think somebody, somehow or other, you need to have a conversation with your officers about putting that misapprehension right, because I was of the opinion that there was at the very least a delay, a very prolonged delay in it, and I think somehow or other you've got to reinforce the fight or retell the public that actually we're still going to have one, but we're just having difficulties.
Absolutely, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question, Rebecca. Yeah,
Rebecca.
Thanks, Mark. That was handy. So the next question is about methane emissions. They make up a small portion of Sheffield's greenhouse gas emissions compared to carbon dioxide, but we know that it's a much more potent greenhouse gas. These appendices that were sent out, there were maps showing the key sources of methane emissions across the city, which was really useful. So my question is, how challenging are these methane emissions to reduce from current levels, and are there to reduce them across the city over the next 5 to 10 years?
So I'm happy to pick this up, and Mark, you might want to add some to this. When the commission was done and it was taken forward with Ricardo and Arab, they have briefly, as you rightly say, alluded to methane. It is a potent greenhouse gas. It has a multiplying effect above and beyond that of CO2 on its own. It is a critical component, but it has been built into the considerations and the measures that we will hopefully address. The carbon dioxide is a significant element of what we need to tackle. But yes, we are mindful that methane needs to be done. Mark, do you want to pick up and elaborate on some of those points?
Thank you, Mark. Yes, yeah, just to reiterate really what Mark's highlighted there. I think the report, you're right, that the report highlights that that there's a relatively small percentage of emissions that arise from methane in terms of our overall greenhouse gas emissions in the city. I think one of the things that's worth highlighting is that the report takes into account that increased potential, as Mark's outlined, as in methane in the environment, as we know, sort of is something in the region of 84%. 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. But what you'll notice is that the report refers to carbon dioxide equivalent. So it takes into account that it's not tons of equivalent, it's taken into account the extra effect of the methane. So in that sense, it balances that to show that it's not, it's the proportion that you see there. Now, clearly, as Mark said, it's still 8% equivalent of our emissions across the city. What the report went on to focus on was to look at carbon emissions and identify the actions where, from a perspective of the largest and most significant greenhouse gas emissions, where those actions are that we can take in terms of decarbonising heat or reducing emissions from vehicles, for example. I think we should add that doesn't mean that we're not we're excluding methane and other greenhouse gases from the work that we'll be doing across the city. It's just that this baselining work and this initial piece of work was focusing on carbon, but clearly there are other activities that are taking place both across the council and with other partners that are looking at actually how we reduce those other emissions. So for example, work that we're doing with organisations on some of our natural flood management or some of the work around things like the Moors for the Future programme will contribute towards that. And clearly that's an area that we've got to explore in more detail, but this report took that decision to focus predominantly on the greenhouse gases related to carbon and energy systems.
Okay, Rebecca, I think you have a final one.
Yeah, so the TIN Centre reported a rapid programme of decarbonisation is required, commencing in 2020 and averaging 14% year-on-year reduction. So is Sheffield on track to reduce emissions by 14% this year for 2020? And then it gets a bit more complicated. I wonder if you knew what proportion of that reduction, if there was a reduction, came from reduced economic activity versus kind of decarbonisation in real terms. And given any decarbonisation that we've managed to achieve, will we be on track for next year to do 14% decarbonisation for this year, and then for by the end of 2021 will we then therefore be on track to complete what the Tyndall Centre has suggested in terms of our progress for the next 5 years or so?
Thank you, Rebecca. I think you were referring to the rate of loss for this year and such like. The measurements that we take at the moment currently are based on the BEIS baselines. That's the government accountancy tool, and we use that as a way of calculating our outputs and everything else. It's a very thorough database. Unfortunately, like many accounts, it's produced a year in arrears, so it's difficult to actually capture that data this year. We wouldn't actually be receiving that data till next year. So it's an artifact, unfortunately. There is going to be no doubt that we will have had significant impacts, beneficial impacts environmentally in terms of carbon emissions. We have unfortunately seen vehicle use returning to near pre-COVID periods, and transport remains a significant part of our carbon footprint as a city. So though we're not relying on the plus side of COVID, though it's difficult to actually imagine what that truly is, there will have been progress, but it's difficult to actually calculate this year. We will be looking to establish tools where we can do better modelling and feeding in stuff, so we can better understand what's going on. Mark, is there anything you'd like to add on that one?
Thanks, Mark. Yes, I'll just, I think, just picking up the point around the data, I think it's worth just explaining that applies to other cities as well in the UK. So we all use that, in the main, use that data set, and that is why some of the work that was produced this year refers to 2017, and it's not because we don't have, we're not using the latest data, it's just that obviously that's the cycle, unfortunately, with regards to how BEIS, how the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy collect that information. But I think that getting to the point around the trajectory, as Mark said, we're likely to see some reductions due to energy reduction through COVID, and that's obviously part of the work we've undertaken earlier in the year around the gap analysis, which we'll come on to in a moment in the presentation, and it was also in some of the papers that were circulated. And now clearly on that, it showed that we are some way off achieving the rate of decarbonisation that's required because of, you know, as a result of some of those national policies and also at the local level. And I think on that basis, we probably, obviously we're trying to sort of crystal ball gaze in a sense, but I think we're probably not on that route. I think what we'll be looking at is somewhere off that. So we clearly need to understand in a bit more detail about what those options are, and that's part of the work we're doing. we are working on the next stage in terms of the actions that are required to enable us to drive down those carbon emissions as a city. But obviously, we also need to take into account the impact of COVID, but also recognise that in previous economic downturns, and obviously this is very, very different from what we heard yesterday in the Chancellor's statement. But even so, we still need to take into account that in previous examples, carbon emissions have bounced back, and in some instances gone beyond that. So we can't be complacent in the work that we're doing now.
And I think that's kind of really important that Mark's just picked up on there. With the Citizens' Assembly and what our partners and stakeholders throughout the city often say is that we need to speak the truth. And we are absolutely determined that this report is very much about that. It's showing that though great progress has been made previously over many, many years, it's not enough. And we will need to move faster and with greater determination to do that. So though it is with regret that we feel that the projections show that we will not hit our targets, it just acts as a catalyst to encourage us to work harder and use more imagination and to collectively shout louder to get those levers that we all need. There's a lot of things that the council may do, but there's a lot of things that are outside the council's remit, and we will need greater intervention both locally and nationally if we're to have any chance of achieving that, because retrofitting of homes and such like, it doesn't come cheap, and the industry to deliver that isn't there. We will need others to help us achieve that, and we are determined that we will through this analysis highlight the challenges we have, and collectively we'll find those answers.
Thank you, Mark. I think that was a fairly comprehensive response. Are you happy with that, Rebecca?
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you. Rachel Hand. Rachel has disappeared off my screen, or maybe she just moved around a bit. Oh, there you are. Yeah. There you are. You've moved.
Yeah. I'm the partnership development coordinator for Sheffield Climate Alliance, and I also have a place on the Green City Partnership Board.
Okay.
So my question is a question for the Scrutiny Committee.
Hmm.
Will the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee commit to adopting the recommendations of this report? In particular, will they support the establishment of a cross-party climate change and sustainability committee and the creation of a properly resourced team of sustainability officers to both ensure and demonstrate that the council is responding to the climate crisis in a sufficient and timely manner?
I think it's probably incumbent upon me to make at least some attempt to answer that question. I mean, I'm not going to preempt what the committee is going to decide in terms of the cross-party committee, but given that the cabinet member is promoting such an idea, I think it might well, hopefully, fall on favourable ears. And the resources is another issue that is outside of our control. I mean, at this moment in time, we have got a very large hole in our budget, and unfortunately, the budget is largely dependent on outside sources, the Chancellor mainly. But what I think I'm fairly safe in saying that, given the seriousness of the situation and the need to move quickly on the issues of climate change, that the resourcing of the team and the resourcing of the measures that need to be taken to help with the crisis will be at the very forefront of our discussions in terms of next year's budget. I can't give you an absolute guarantee, because who knows what the Chancellor is going to give us, but there will be some serious discussions about what we need to invest to make real change in our carbon footprint. I hope that gives you some reassurance. What I can't do here is give you any categorical guarantees about resources. Would you say that was a reasonable answer, Mark?
Yes, and I'd obviously welcome as many resources as we can. It's how we deliver that, how we do that, and for my part, I'll confess to being slightly sentimental here. I would love to see the pioneering work done by my predecessor and colleague of some of you sitting on this board today, of Alf Mead. The work that he did was truly visionary. I'd love to see a committee established for all cross-party members to engage in, so we can come to a collective position and push forward our collective knowledge on making sure that the council works in a more sustainable and environmentally friendly manner. And I would truly welcome the recommendations of this committee on that one, and I thank you, Chair, for your kind supportive words, and Rachel for her very pertinent and poignant question.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Are you reasonably happy with that answer? Yeah, thank you. I have a third question from someone who isn't here. Alice, are you going to read it out, or is John Turner, the Wednesdayite, going to read it out? Or?
I'll read it out, Chair. It is another one for the committee, and it is from Jenny Carpenter, who is the co-chair of Sheffield Climate Alliance. I apologise. Her question is, does the committee recognise the need for both members and officers to be trained in carbon literacy if the climate emergency is to be tackled in a timely and thorough-going manner?
The answer to that is yes.
Okay.
I think you cannot tackle an issue of that magnitude without at least a reasonable level of understanding of what the problem is. I'm not going to sit here and say that I understood every single word of the answers that both Marks gave to the public questions, because I didn't. I'm not an expert, but what I do know is that when I look outside my window, the weather is changing, the climate is changing. I understand that. What I'm looking for is someone who can make that change manageable, or at least arrest it in some way. So that's that one. I think I should say that the reason that the member of the public isn't here is because unfortunately they sent the questions in beyond the deadline. Otherwise they would have been here to do it in person. And I think we have another one.
We do, Chair. Yes, this is from Lindy Stone, who is the coordinator of Sheffield Friends of the Earth. And again, it's to the committee. How can the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee be assured that a properly resourced team of sustainability officers will be created to take forward the necessary work?
Well, I think I've more or less answered that, in the sense of we will be giving it some very serious thought when it comes down to setting the budget. I don't know. I don't like speaking for cabinet members, Mark, but do you think that's a reasonable answer?
Yes, indeed, Chair. And knowing that there is appetite and will for that across the council is greatly helpful, because obviously we do face significant pressures. There is a massive hole in our budget, and though it may not be a case of recruiting significant numbers of public, even diverting time of existing officers, given that there would be a budget, there would be an impact on their availability for other works, if we were to able to simply divert 300 members of our existing staff to give us 1 day a week on sustainability, that would give us a massive uplift in terms of our outreach and our presence within the council. But you know, if I can bring in more people, if I can have money to create new jobs, that would be amazing. But I am mindful that I can't be unrealistic at this time in asking for monies that may not be there. We just have to find a way of making this happen.
But I mean, there is. I mean, there's an assumption in what you and I have both said, which has just struck me, is that we're talking about just the council putting in resources. There are other big players in this city who could possibly be part of the team. So it might not necessarily, the burden of trying to make progress might not necessarily simply fall upon the council. So maybe between the major players in the city, we might be able to put together a team that is of sufficient size and expertise to actually deal with the problem.
Absolutely, Chair. Yes.
Okay. I think that's it, question-wise. Bear with me. The problem with these phones is that unless you do something with it,
it is
seconds.
Yeah.
In 30 seconds, it switches itself off. Right. Is that, sorry, John, what were you saying?
Yeah, I'm just confirming that they're all the 4 questions we've had now. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Rebecca, for turning up this morning. It's nice to see the public committed to such a major issue that we're all facing. And I do hope, actually, that there are a number of people watching us this morning as well. So thank you. I think we're about to say goodbye to you now. Nothing personal. It's just that that's the way it is. Okay. Bye-bye. Are we on to the presentation now? Is that right?
Sorry, is Rachel still with us?
Not now. She's been eaten by a reindeer. No, I think we're okay. So are we now onto the presentation? Just I've lost my agenda. Yeah.
Is that a question for Kate's nodding?
It's the presentation. Away you go.
Yeah, so I'll hand over to Mark Whitworth. Are you going to share screen for committee members?
And as I say, sorry to interrupt. If you want to ask a question, make a comment, whatever, use the chat, please.
Chair, do you want us to take the questions all at the end, or do you want us to take the questions?
I think it's better that way, personally, otherwise it can get a bit messy. And
okay.
It's just normal practice, Mark, I think.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chair. So, Mark Whitworth, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. So hopefully you can all see my slides now. Great stuff. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, I'm just going to run through a short presentation that just outlines some of the background to what's been going on and the situation that we're in at the moment, but also looking forward as well. Just to start really by highlighting that Sheffield has had a strong record of accomplishment on sustainability. Councillor Jones mentioned in one of the responses about Councillor Alf Mead, and Councillor Mead was instrumental in establishing Sheffield Heat and Power, we were one of the first cities in the UK to develop an energy recovery facility. More recently, we've been trialling electric refuse collection vehicles, which I'll go on to mention in a little bit more detail in a moment. But also, as we've highlighted already, the city's got a number of very active and engaged organisations, some of whom we've heard from this morning, as well as businesses and individuals who are already helping to make us on that journey towards net zero. So the starting point for this work is the Paris Climate Accord from 2015, where signatory nations signed up to agree to limit and reduce carbon emissions to hold an increase in global average temperatures to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, but also to pursue every effort to limit that to 1.5 degrees. Now, the response at the time, we had a Green Commission, and the strategy, this Green City strategy, which the Council adopted in 2018, reflected that. and had a target at the time of Sheffield becoming net zero carbon by 2050. The report on the right was the global warming of 1.5 degrees that was issued by the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in October of 2018. And that actually highlighted the need for much faster change, and also highlighted some of the challenges that would be faced if we didn't, if we tried to exceed if we were exceeding 1.5 degrees, and actually that the 2 degrees was too high. And so the council's response to that in terms of some of the changes is obviously to declare a climate emergency. But before we go into that, I thought that it'd be worth just picking up on some of the chair's comments around the change in weather and climate that we're experiencing, and actually just to highlight that this is something that is often seen as an international issue, but actually is having an impact closer to home and is affecting us here in Sheffield. So in 2018, the UK and Sheffield experienced widespread drought and a 3-month heat wave. 2019 recorded the highest UK temperature of 38.7 degrees, widespread flooding throughout South Yorkshire, as well as the most rainfall in Sheffield in a single day since 2000. We've had, in terms of excess deaths, a high number from those periods of extreme temperature. And quite remarkably, in some regards, the UK is the 20th most vulnerable country to heat waves in the world, and we're the 8th in Europe, which actually puts us ahead of places such as Australia, which are clearly much hotter. The impact around things, for example, like rising energy costs are expected to continue, and where weather changes mean that food patterns, where extreme weather conditions are affecting food security, we are then seeing those rising food costs. So obviously those impacts are most harshly felt on our more deprived communities. Of course, we can't ignore the COVID pandemic. It's having a devastating and often inequitable impact on our communities and residents. We recognise that in these very challenging times, climate change and decarbonisation may not be at the forefront of people's minds as we deal with the immediate and often very difficult impacts of the current pandemic. I think the other thing, though, is that there are some opportunities. So, for example, travel behaviours have changed if people are able to work from home, and the use of technologies has changed how we move about. And so some of those behaviour changes, whilst, as I say, it may not be at the forefront of people's minds, some polls undertaken by the government and by other polling agencies have shown that there's a large proportion of people who are still very concerned about the climate, and that there are other opportunities. A recent HSBC report that was issued earlier in the year identified that the COVID-19 crisis is actually accelerating a change in consumption behaviour and broadening public support for a cleaner economy and environmental responsibility. So, in terms of some of the responses that we're seeing internationally, obviously this is growing rapidly. The policy isn't changing fast enough to keep up with it, but actually we're seeing in the UK the target of being zero carbon by 2050. The government's 10-point plan that was issued last week, which has come under fire for not going far enough and not being ambitious enough. But policies such as banning the sale of diesel and petrol cars from 2030 will begin to have an implication for us here in Sheffield, and we need to be thinking about actually how we make the best of some of these opportunities, albeit that they may not be going far enough or fast enough for our 2030 target. So in terms of our response and building on the work of the existing Green City strategy, we declared a climate emergency in February 2019. Following on from that, we commissioned the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change in Manchester to produce a carbon budget report for the city, which set a budget of 16 million tonnes. And I'll go on in a moment to talk a little bit about that and what that means, or what that meant at the time. We then had a stated ambition to be net zero carbon by 2030. And following on from that, we've jointly commissioned an evidence-based report with our Green City Partnership Board. And that's clearly a really important piece of work in terms of understanding both the position in terms of where our greenhouse gas emissions come from, but also understanding what are the opportunities, where are the areas that we can decarbonise, and how can we start to take some of those steps. And that will then inform the development of that zero carbon plan. One of the things I think is really important to emphasise is that alongside that, there's been, we haven't just been developing an evidence base, that there has been action that's been taking place both within the council but also with other partners. And I'll go on to touch on some of those examples of where those actions have been taking place to actually start driving down carbon emissions. But before I do that, I just wanted to touch a little bit on the carbon budget. The report is in the papers that were circulated and calculated a carbon budget for the city, which effectively gave us an overall carbon budget of 16 million tonnes. And that was for us to stay within the Paris Agreement. We would use that entire budget in less than 6 years at 2017 levels when the report was produced and using that data. So therefore, rapid decarbonisation is required, commencing in 2020 and averaging, as one of the questions highlighted at the outset, a 14 year-on-year reduction in carbon emissions. And that set a target of 2038 at the latest. I mentioned the Green City Partnership Board. I thought it was worth just highlighting who's on that board, and that the board, the details are included within the papers. But this is a list of the organisations that are represented, so there are members that are identified in the papers that have been circulated. It provides critical function of bringing together key partners and stakeholders from across the city to work on those solutions to address our climate emergency. And as I said, over the course of the year, they've been helping to oversee this and steer the zero carbon report. Despite the COVID pandemic, obviously it's been important to progress that work. Now, I mentioned that alongside the development of that report, that there's been a variety of areas where the council and its partners have been taking action and where various programmes are contributing towards our carbon plan. I think the first I mentioned earlier is for example, with our electric refuse collection vehicle trial. One of the first boroughs, Sheffield as a city and a London borough were involved in that trial. But also we send one of the lowest amounts of waste to landfill. It's less than 0.05% that's going to landfill. And the majority of waste that's consumed within our energy recovery facilities, providing heat and hot water to something in the order of 21,000 buildings and homes across the city. We're also involved in, for example, the Greater Green Scheme, which is the award-winning adaptation to climate change that motivates people in terms of making it easier for people to cycle and to walk through this area, providing green space and much needed in terms of some of the other opportunities for places just to go and sit outside. Took a redundant piece of road carriageway and has transformed that, and is actually now one of the largest retrofit sustainable urban drainage schemes in the country. So a very, very impressive programme there. Alongside it, we are now developing the Connecting Sheffield programme, which is about something in the order of 100 million of investment that's going to be enabling Sheffield to make travelling in greener and cleaner ways much easier. And I think it's also worth just mentioning the Heart of the City programme and Heart of the City 2, and in particular, two of the buildings in there, one which is the existing, the new HSBC offices, which were built to a very high environmental standard, but also one of the new offices that are going to be constructed in that site will actually be a net carbon building. And
for me, if I could just come in there, interrupt Mark there briefly, the delivery of a passive office building is totemic for the city, though it may feel somewhat redundant as we go to the new way of working, which is on Zoom. We have to remember that just as I'm a sentimental person, so is humanity. As we go back to the post-COVID period, it is likely that people will resort to the comfortable ways of working that we had before. So though it may feel strange that we build office buildings now that may not be as occupied as they were, the sheer fact that we are building those offices, the sheer fact that we have an office in Sheffield which will not consume any energy for its running, sets out a marker for the city, sets out a marker and sets the city apart from the rest of the country and shows our ambition. So these developments we should embrace and champion, because because all too often we hide our light under a bushel, and that doesn't necessarily help us progress and attract the developers to our city that we want to actually build that sustainable and cleaner future. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. So I mentioned earlier the work that we've been undertaking with the Green City Partnership Board to develop the evidence base. This is the Zero Carbon Commission, and it's been focusing on both action, but also on the need for a good, strong evidence base, which is required in order to enable us to inform what the programme will look like over 10 years. I think it's essential that we have that very strong base in order to help inform, for example, bids, both into and also being able to understand, for example, government funding asks, and establish what the scale of the challenges and also where, in terms of some of the big opportunities and also some of the challenges are, how we can actually try and resolve some of those. So these three elements here, particularly the citywide pathway report, is focused on action. There's also an ongoing piece of work which will inform the way we work, both as an organisation and how we work with our partners across the city. We've circulated the first and second report. So we've circulated the baseline report in the papers and also the business as usual projections report. So the baseline report, as it says on the slide, was about establishing the current position. I'll touch on that in a moment. The business as usual projections looked at the effects of current policy, or current policy as was about 3 months ago. And then the final piece of work which has been concluded at the moment is around citywide zero carbon pathways. It's about setting out the actions that we need as a city to be able to achieve net zero 2030. The other thing that's alongside that is we've also commissioned a piece of work which will look at what the council needs to do within its own estate, across its own buildings and housing and fleet and transport. So just very briefly to touch on the on those two reports which have been circulated. This is the baseline from the baseline emissions report. So it shows that that we've made reasonable progress over the last decade or so, and actually reduced since 2005 our carbon emissions in the scale of 42%. Now you can see from that graph that some of those areas have decarbonised more rapidly than others. Industrial and commercial, the largest amount, and transport, not surprisingly, the least. If we look at that in a little bit more detail, I'm not intending to spend too long on this slide, but if we look at that in a little bit more detail, you can begin to see that, for example, some of the challenges that we face both in Sheffield, but this is a national challenge as well, is, for example, that domestic gas, in terms of its proportion, is still relatively large compared, for example, to some of the electricity, for example, industrial and commercial, which obviously is partly as a result of national trends. So as the grid's decarbonised, the electricity that we're using here in Sheffield has become cleaner. But you then start to see that quite clearly transport is still a big chunk of our carbon emissions and hasn't reduced very much at all. And clearly that highlights that around, for example, decarbonisation of heat and the transport issue are two of the areas that we and other cities need to address. In terms of the challenge ahead, this picks up on the question that Rebecca asked earlier around where we might be on this downward trajectory. We did a piece of work which looked at what current policies, where current policy took us to. And the gap analysis has highlighted that, for example, looking at national policy, and within this we included the ban on petrol and diesel cars, which has come forward since that date was initially set, but also on, for example, the Future Homes Standard and the ban on gas appliances in new homes from 2025. And what this has shown is that national policy and how that's been delivered locally in terms of some of the changes that we can implement here will not achieve our 2030 ambition. And I think, as national commentators have identified, the current government policy will not achieve the national target of 2050, that there's obviously a need to accelerate those national policies in order for the government to remain within its carbon budgets. In fact, I think the government's Committee on Climate Change is making the announcements on its carbon budgets in the next week or so, and it'll be interesting to see what their forecasts are. and how those align with what we can see here in terms of the fact that we missed that carbon target. But I think what it identifies is that there's obviously a need for us to accelerate the decarbonisation here in Sheffield in terms of some of the local action that we can take. But I would like to point out that, of course, this isn't just a challenge that's unique to Sheffield, and that other cities and towns in the country will be facing with the same challenge if we look at the challenge around current and existing policy. And some of this goes back to what Councillor Jones was highlighting in one of the responses around speaking the truth, and which is something that Extinction Rebellion have asked for the council to do, in terms of actually presenting the evidence as it is, and just to show really that there are some big challenges that we need to rise up to, but also, as we hope to go on and show, that there are some significant opportunities. So I mentioned that there's a third piece of work which has been undertaken around looking at what the pathways are that we can take within the city. I don't have that here today to go through, and that's something that we'll be intending to come back to present sometime early in the new year. But in terms of some of those things that we are likely to see or could see in the report, this could mean that we need to supply all our energy from renewable sources, either within the city or from outside of the city, but we need to be providing 100% of our energy from renewable sources. That there'll be a significant shift towards active travel. So it's that reduction in car miles. It's not just switching to electric vehicles. It will require a full switch to electric, but it will also mean that there is actually a significant shift away from people using vehicles and looking at active travel as a way of getting around the city. One of the big things is going to mean a phase out of gas for heating and cooking, and we have something in the order of probably 200,000 homes that will be affected by that. And clearly that is something that is quite a significant challenge. But also it brings about significant opportunities, because of course, as those houses and businesses that have heating that uses gas shift away from that, there'll be new technologies and there'll be requirements for new skills and new jobs for people to come in and actually fit those systems. And that's where we see one of the big opportunities around a zero carbon economy.
Could I ask how near we are to the end of your presentation, Mark?
We're about 4 slides away, Chair.
Okie doke.
So very briefly, just really put this slide up here to show that there are other wider opportunities, particularly resulting in terms of how cities are responding around the world from the COVID pandemic, and looking to see where there are benefits, particularly around actually how they can create jobs in an inclusive economy in terms of the bounce back and the build back better response from the COVID pandemic as things are at the moment. Mentioned about some of the benefits earlier, but again, just to sort of highlight that there are clearly a number of wider opportunities that this strategy will bring, and that they will actually help deliver some of the other outcomes that we're looking for in terms of cleaner air or better jobs, more jobs, in terms of being a more pleasant and healthier place to live, and that also some of this investment can actually save people money. So in terms of next steps, we are intending to bring the final report to scrutiny in the new year. We need to bring that report through with our Green City Partnership Board. Mark's highlighted what we intend to be doing in terms of that wider engagement across the city, and actually having that conversation around the evidence that we've accrued so far, but also to have those conversations and in a sense help to co-design the zero carbon plan, because as we've hopefully picked up in some of the points I've made, this is about action across the city and all partners and residents being involved in the delivery of that. In terms of some of the things we're looking to do internally, we're developing a climate impact assessment to use in our decision-making processes, and some of those are picked up in the recommendations to the committee here. We're also pursuing the declaration of an ecological emergency, which was something which was presented to the Green City Partnership Board by the Chief Executive of the Wildlife Trust, Liz Ballard, at our last meeting, and is something that Councillor Jones is now exploring and keen to pursue. And we will continue as an organisation to seize opportunities to decarbonise. I'll just leave or finish off with the 3 recommendations that were in the report, which was that scrutiny chairs to support and challenge other committees on climate action, to support the rollout of carbon and climate awareness programmes for members and officers and to attend those awareness sessions, and also to support the establishment of a cross-party climate change and sustainability committee, which Councillor Jones has outlined at the start. Thank you, Chair.
Cheers.
Thank you.
And Chair, if I could
Right.
just come in there, in terms of the carbon literacy stuff, we can actually deliver that training hopefully in January of 2021. So I have already approached some people about trying to make sure that we get people to come on that, but if we can start making sure we can bring those dates forward for you and we can try and get all members to commit to those dates, that would be amazing. And that's something I'd really welcome. Thank you.
Okie dokie. Right. I've got a series of questions and I'm going to start with Shoned.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just croak through them here. I wanted to ask the question which I think most people feel, which is that we all know about climate change and it concerns us all greatly, but it sometimes feels so big that how do we do something, you know, me in my small corner, as it were. And also there is the question of the people who also recognise it's a big issue, but frankly, getting on with their life and just getting through it makes thinking green, if you like, feel like a luxury. That is something that people with more money can do, if you like, whether it's people who can afford an electric car or who can do all the things that we think ought to be happening now. So how do we work with people to say there are things you can do and make it something that is an easy option for people who, you know, have complicated and difficult lives? I sort of think of the ward I represent, where I have a large number of people who really think it's important and are working really hard at making one part of the ward much greener, and other people who are just getting through life. And I suppose another one is just, how are you going to support, following on from that, local businesses and employers to think about what they can do, what changes they can make in order to engage in a future that is more sustainable? So if you like, that's going from local people through to our local businesses, if you like. We all know that Marks and Spencers and everything like that know it's important, but what can we do in helping our smaller businesses in our own wards? Thank you, Chair.
Pleasure.
Chair, do you want me to come in now, or do you want to take some more? Or?
I think it might be sensible to deal with each question at a time, because people are indicating to me on chat that they've got several questions. So deal with Sean Ed and then we'll go to the next question. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question, Shoned. Yes, this is big and it is scary, and a lot of the things that can be done will need to be done by others. And you're absolutely right to talk of those that are just getting by. Climate change isn't something about protecting cuddly animals and trees and such like. It's about protecting people. Those with the least will pay the biggest price for this, because they have the least capacity to respond and adapt to the new world as the challenges of climate change begin to progressively bite, and they will. We will see increases in temperature, and you know, some will look to put air conditioning on their house to make it easier for them to live. That's not going to be acceptable to most, and actually that's an energy burner that's going to fuel the pyre that we'll all burn on. So we have to find a way of getting that just and fair transition that works for everybody in our city. We cannot allow climate change to extenuate and further amplify the inequalities that already exist within Sheffield. So for me, an integral part of that has to be part of the community wealth building, the upskilling of every citizen, and the delivery of the new jobs and the new opportunities that are carbon based. A simple step, for instance, could be simply taking the decision to support our marketplaces better. We as an authority already underwrite our markets, but those small traders those small businesses are mostly locally based and mostly sustainable. If we can give people the opportunity to work and exist and grow and develop those innovative positions and allow them to transition away from other jobs or simply actually get into jobs, we can then start helping all our citizens adapt for the new clean future that we want, and encouraging those entrepreneurs to grow and giving them the opportunities, whether that needs to be supported in some way by a universal basic income. It's something that we can just speculate on at the moment. So there are many things that we could do and should look to do. A lot of those policies are national. Maybe we look to push some schemes here locally. But yes, I genuinely think that community wealth building is something that should be running through the core of everything that we're looking to go forward on. Mark, is there anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. If I could, I think the point you made about how we work through businesses, I think that's a really important element, because there's, as has been pointed out, this is something that large businesses in the city or national companies are already on this agenda. So actually some of those smaller companies, and as we found out from some of the work on the baselining work, emissions don't necessarily, only 5% of our carbon emissions come from large industrial premises. It's actually the smaller commercial industrial companies, the SMEs, that make up that mix. And I think recognizing that, and then actually seeing, for example, how we're currently trying to secure some funding through the very end of the European Regional Development Programme to actually enable a grant to businesses to take up a loan, to take up energy efficient measures. Now, if we're successful with that, that would actually part fund some of those measures, would help some of those businesses to do things like install energy efficient lighting or install energy efficient heating on premises and so on. So some very simple measures, but actually would go quite a long way and help secure some of that. But I think thinking longer term, it's about how we continue to have some of those conversations with, for example, the Chamber of Commerce, and recognise that they've got good networks out into other businesses, working with the universities, because the universities are very, again, they're dealing with a lot of work where there's potential, Councillor Jones has pointed out, around green growth, and that's seen as one of the big areas that's a potential growth sector, even with the COVID pandemic and the implications of that. I think the other thing is just to point out around the work that we need to do in terms of building on those conversations with organisations like Manor Castle Development Trust, or with some of the other organisations that are already working to some degree in this area, because obviously people suffering with fuel poverty are suffering the effects of some of this, but also helping to identify, for example, where the government's current grants for green homes for energy efficiency are, trying to flag some of those things up and actually making sure that people are made aware of that. So some of this is about signposting and about helping communicate and actually making some of those connections. It's not necessarily about us actually doing the heavy lifting, because actually hopefully there may be other organisations that are doing some of that. It's just that sometimes these conversations aren't happening and people aren't aware of some of these things. So there's a combination, I think, in terms of the approaches that need to be taken there, and really sort of that sensible approach of understanding where, as Mark's pointed out already, that those impacts are likely to be where people can't afford to switch to a heat pump. We need to be thinking about that now. If those 200,000 homes in the city are going to be taken off gas boilers, how do we make sure that that's done in a fair way? And Mark said about a fair and just transition. That's really something we need to start planning for.
Okay, Sinead. The next one is Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the graphs, how things have fallen, I just wonder globally to what extent heavy industry is not really an achievement. It's just something that we've exported somewhere else and then re-import on expensive and polluting shipping, which is a big contributor after aviation. Because the toughest nuts to crack, would you agree, are the ones where we could do something about it, and probably struggling transport and domestic housing stock. There there's a little bit on page 65 of the report, 105 of the report pack, and we talk about local energy generation. And members might have received an email from somebody promoting a local electricity bill, because the monopolistic runners of the national grid charge £1 zillion just to get access for local generation. And I just wonder if we made any representation on that as such. I'm probably going to ask one of the marks, Chair, about, it's a difficult question to answer, I guess, as cabinet member or as the officer. But
They're the best kind.
I just wonder when you, well, it's just on the basis of, you know, given the importance of all of this, how much time do you get when you make representation? I mean, you know, you report, Mark, to Ed Highfield and then on to Lorraine. Obviously, Mark, you're the cabinet member, and, you know, is it what sort of, how do you feel about that in terms of, you know, getting attention? Do you want me to press on, because I was going to cover transport?
Yeah, you might as well. Keep
Transport,
going.
I mean, to still the same, the answer to most of the problems include climate change. Is a decent bus service. That is the way to move lots of people. It's also a way to improve the efficiency of the economy for those who need to use the road network. And also it's more inclusive of people who don't have the luxury of deciding between a subsidised electric bike, possibly, or something else, or can't afford a car. Or indeed, I saw some inflation figures a month or two ago, which said one of the contributors to higher than expected inflation was that the price of used cars was going up as more people were trying to buy them. So put that plug in. I've spent all my time arguing for a franchise system. So I find it hard to argue for something that might be better, but probably isn't going to be achieved in terms of national legislation. My final point was about the truth on climate change, and it'd be interesting, this cross-party committee, because I get a lot of emails, maybe other members do, from people urging me to tell the truth about climate change and tell me that people have been forced to buy a car and have been forced to travel less than a mile. And I'm afraid I don't buy that. Personal mobility as a personal attribute is highly valuable. I value it a lot, and I didn't start driving a car till I was nearly 50. And I've done all the walking and cycling thing. But my observation of the world is that most people would like that degree of personal mobility. So would you agree with me that we're going to, with increasing urgency, ask people politely to stop doing those sorts of things in the interest of the greater good, and think about walking and cycling? But I think, would you further agree, though, cycling is principally a health benefit more than anything else. So one of the truths probably is that we're going to have to ask people to stop doing some things, and if they don't stop doing it, we're going to have to take measures to make them think, I'm going to have to do this because I'm not. It would be quicker to walk. It would be better to catch the bus. I mean, there's a little scheme in Wood Seats which will remove traffic from a cut through, and I'd take that opportunity, because it hasn't been possible in the last 10 years. But the last time people were asked about it, opinion was very divided. So there are all these surveys showing that a lot of people, you know, they're in favour of this, that and the other, and they give up this, that and the other. When it comes to the detail, it's really quite difficult to get people on board. And I've had as many emails from concerned local residents who say, don't do this at all, or don't do it this way, do it the other way, compared to those who say, I'd like my street to be traffic free. It's very, very mixed. So I don't know what you think about all of that, but that's me done and my comments as well, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ian. Yeah, I know you've been a long time champion for better buses, and I fully support you on all of that. Quite an expansive set of questions, Mark. I'll let you pick up the global element of the carbon. We have always elaborate on that more. I have always insisted that the various scopes of carbon emissions should be put in there, including. I don't believe for a minute we should look to outsource our. Oh, sorry. I've got some work going on, so there might be loud drilling noises. I apologise now. Mark, do you want to? Oh, yeah, yeah. Mark, do you want to pick up the global bit?
Thank you, Mark. Yes, I'll pick that up. So yeah, so Councillor Auckland's raised a good point around the what's referred to as the Scope 3 emissions. So effectively, this piece of work, or rather this evidence base that's been commissioned to look at our greenhouse gas emissions, has focused on scopes 1 and 2. So in other words, energy that's consumed within Sheffield that might be generated elsewhere in the country, or energy that's resulting in emissions in Sheffield, so burning of gas or industrial processes, for example. And one of the reasons why that decision was taken was because it was in line with the previous piece of work around the carbon budget, because the Tyndall report looked at the carbon budget for the UK and then broke that down to Sheffield level. And so in line with those agreements, like the Paris Agreement at the top, that looks at those national budgets. So, for example, the steel or the products that are made elsewhere in China, for example, and then shipped here, as you rightly pointed out, those carbon budgets are actually attributed either to China or to shipping and aviation. And you're right, because shipping and aviation in particular, has a very large budget apportioned to it. And some would argue that actually that's wrong and it shouldn't have such a huge portion budget to it, but that's that's obviously a separate conversation. But one of the things that that question does flag up is the need for us to look at those consumption emissions. So what comes from the things that we consume here in the city that have come from elsewhere. It's a very complex field, and we've had some conversations with the university and with other cities who've tried to do some of this work, and it has been difficult. That's not to say that it shouldn't be looked at, but it is a difficult question. I don't know, for example, in Sheffield, whether we've worked closely with the steel industry, so for example with Liberty Steel, and about whether, although the industry's shrank in some regards, that the actual quantity of material that's been produced is as much as it was 10, 20, 30 years ago in the city. It's just that it's in terms of actually how it's manufactured has changed in terms of the number of people employed in that industry. But it does flag up the point that some of those products that we're consuming now may have been made here in Sheffield or made in the country and are now being made overseas. And so it does mean that we need to consider at some point what those other emissions are and actually how we can manage those, what impact we can have in terms of reducing those emissions. And that's where some of the programme around carbon impact assessments, for example, as we start to try and introduce those into our procurement processes, mean that we then start to ask the question about understanding what those impacts are of items that have been produced elsewhere might be, and try and have a way of trying to evaluate those. But as I say, it is quite a complex field.
And I'll try and get in with some answers.
Could I just interrupt?
Yeah.
Sorry to do this, but is it really worth? Can I ask a really sort of almost heretical question? Is it worth the effort of doing all of that? What you're talking about, just to get what answer?
To get the answer, I think that so the carbon baselining work and the work that we've done at the moment looking at our scopes 1 and 2 emissions is around all the energy that we consume here in Sheffield. From a Paris Climate Agreement perspective, which tries to capture all of those through the agreement, it means that where we're talking about products that may be made overseas or consume energy in their production, that we're not actually accounting for those when we're using them here in the city, and they will be, and they will account for quite a considerable amount of carbon or for the greenhouse gas emissions. It gets complicated because of the way that they're accounted for, but I think that it's something we should be aware of, because clearly there are, whether it's transport impacts of things being shipped from elsewhere, or whether it's actually the energy that's consumed in making those elsewhere, and the carbon that comes from that, those sorts of considerations potentially should be played into part of that conversation. The challenge is, as I said out at the outset, is that the Paris Climate Agreement, when it apportioned those carbon budgets, it said, right, this is a carbon budget for the UK, and it gave each of those countries in the agreement an apportioned amount of carbon. What we're trying to
Chair,
do
if
then
it helped, I was satisfied with the answer I was getting, particularly the bit about more productivity, actually some steel production, heavy industries about right. So,
yeah. Okay. Yeah. I have got a very long list of questions, so if we could keep answers to pithy, shall we say.
I'll come back to some other things. Yes, we do need better public transport. I'll try and keep that short. In terms of do we get enough time to represent everything, it doesn't necessarily feel like it, but climate change and carbon impacts and everything else, it is very much a golden thread running through all our considerations. It has been highlighted repeatedly at all levels, both within the cabinet and within senior management. So more we can push forward the carbon literacy bit, and that I think is critical for us as an authority, the better that our understanding will be. And though we could always have more time, I feel that we are getting a reasonable part there. Local energy, yes, we did reply to that, and we are very, very supportive of it. Now, yesterday, Mark and myself was on a discussion with Northern Power Grid. If we all transition to electric cars now, there'll be rolling blackouts. Our national power infrastructure, our regional power infrastructure, it is not appropriate. And actually, when we've put in our rapid charging systems, if you compare the price that we pay here in Sheffield to what, say, Birmingham would pay with a different power supply, it's almost doubled for connecting to the grid, simply because of the nature of the networks here. So we will need to be generating power locally. A lot of councils are looking to not merely generate their own electricity as a way of decarbonising and de-risking that carbon element of power supply, but by exporting power, they can sort of offset some of their emissions. I think that's something we should look at doing as well. So actually, we as a city, I would like to see us not merely produce enough electricity for ourselves, but to export stuff as an income generator and a way of further extending our carbon reduction reach. In terms of buying cars and everything else, no, low traffic neighbourhoods are working. By doing low traffic neighbourhoods, we can encourage people to get out of their cars. Some of the feedback we've had is, I'm not going to get on a bike because the roads aren't safe. That becomes a negative feedback stimulus, and until the roads are safe for people to get on a bike, you're not going to do that. So what do we need to do? We need to make places that are low traffic, that we have good cycle lanes, that we have good environments. And wouldn't it be great if our kids were able to go back out and play on the street without fear of getting run over? I've been run over by cars 4 times already. I bounce well. Not everyone's that lucky. So I'm a big advocate for not having so many cars in proximity of people. Thank you, Chair.
I'm assuming you don't go out in thunderstorms as well, Mark.
I've not been hit by lightning yet, but no.
Dear, oh dear. That's, yes, right. Alison.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to read to stop me rambling, so excuse me. So my first question is, it's really positive that we now have the baseline measures
but I'm not clear how we're measuring our progress in carbon emissions reduction. Do we have scientific monitoring systems in place? What indicators are we using, and how often will we publicise the results that we're monitoring? Next question. We know we need to improve energy efficiency and carbon reduction in all homes across the city, but what are we actually planning to make this happen? What are we doing to increase urban food growing to reduce the city's overall carbon footprint and boost biodiversity? Are we going to encourage Sheffielders to adopt a plant-based diet? The report claims that Sheffield leads the way in sustainability thanks to the energy recovery facility. The report states that as well as reducing landfill waste, the energy recovery facility reduces greenhouse gas emissions because it avoids the need to burn fossil fuels to produce energy. However, this claim suggests that energy can only be produced by fossil fuels, which is clearly not the case. We can produce energy using renewable resources such as solar and wind. The report is also contradictory because in the concluding comments of the report, it notes that the largest sources of industrial emissions are iron, steel, followed by incineration. Therefore, the report's strongest claim of evidence of sustainability, the ERF, is also responsible for significant emissions. So that's quite an issue that I feel it's a real elephant in the room in their Green City Partnership Board. Green Council has already requested 2 of the recommendations in the report formally in October 2019, including the call for a cross-party working group, which the Labour group subsequently voted against in February 2020. Why are we waiting to work cross-party on the greatest threat we have ever faced? And I'm pleased to hear, Mark, that you are in favour of a Sheffield renewable energy company. That's really exciting. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. In terms of the questions, progress and method monitoring, there are some things that I'll let Mark pick up on there in terms of using certain Swedish Nordic monitoring systems that we're looking to adopt very quickly. Urban food growth and biodiversity. I attended a site visit with Sheffield and Northern Wildlife Trust. That there is going to need to be more done about growing food locally. This is going to be critical. We need to shorten our supply chains, and it comes back to some of that national offshoring of our carbon footprint that Ian spoke to before. But we've got a balance to make here. So by going up to some of our upland farms, you could see that within pasture that was maintained at a low level, for instance, that there were wax caps growing on that pasture. That biodiversity is achieved by having low carbon pastures. And though that does mean that we still maintain meat, and I'm glad that you're seeing that we don't ban meat altogether, which I think would not necessarily work, nor would it be beneficial to us. Intensifying our food production is going to be needed in some sectors, whereas other sectors we may need to go down the Dutch model of looking to establish polytunnels and hydroponic culturing of food within the urban environment. That is something that I think that we should do, and that others are exploring currently, and I think that's something that we should explore more of ourselves. In terms of the incinerator, yes, it is our heat and power system is efficient, and it is a reasonable way to assume that the incinerator will always power our district heating network. I don't believe that assumption is there. We will look to do different sources of water source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, anaerobic digesters. What we do need to do is have a conversation with our communities, because not everyone wants to be a host to an anaerobic digester because they kind of have a bit of a smell to them. But we need to get around that and understand that if we want power, we need to generate it. Wind and turbine. Dorrance Hotley would be a great site for wind turbines. However, if you live there, they might not want that. So we need to look at what we do on where we do that, where we position things and where we position our infrastructure, because there's a great conversation to be had with our citizens on that one. So I've not quite covered everything that I think you've put in there, but Mark, do you want to mention about the tools for monitoring and recording? And also, yes, we do need a better public facing website. more than anything, because we need to increase that engagement with the public a lot better. We're not where we need to be, and we need to push on that one.
I
Mark?
realise that the questions are quite substantial, but pithy answers would be really good.
Sorry, Chair. Yes.
Okay, so with that in mind, I think just worth just picking up a couple of points there. So on the point about plant-based diets and so on, is I think it's worth just picking up something that came from the UK Climate Assembly, and that was that the discussions there showed that choice was key, and actually giving people that flexibility, but also about promoting the benefits of some of those diets, and actually telling people about opportunities to grow their own food, encouraging consuming less meat, but also growing food in gardens, or even on balconies, and actually how that can help with a number of other things as well as the climate, seeing whether there is sort of cross benefits that this approach will bring, as well as helping reduce carbon emissions. So it's again that sort of nudge really, rather than I think sort of an outright ban on those approaches, which of course is not, I guess, what we're advocating. On the point around carbon emissions, we do rely on as I referred to earlier, we do rely on the government's figures, which are aggregated every year, but normally sort of at least 12 months in arrears, in a sense, that come from the utilities, from the network operators, and they're then collated and then produced through the government's web pages, which would then inform our response in terms of where tracking our carbon emissions are. It's not, unfortunately, because of the current systems, it's not possible for us to almost have like a live feed in terms of what our carbon emissions are. I think over time, then, smart systems come into play, then it's going to be much easier for people to actually have a feel on those things. But at the moment, that's still some way off. And again, Mark mentioned the conversations that we're having with the network operator, with Northern Power Grid, about some of the innovation that could be used in the network. But again, it's not foreseen that immediately we're going to be able to have a button or have a totalize that we are going to be reliant on that. But Mark mentioned some of the work that's been going on in other cities, and a system that's been developed in Sweden, which is called Climate View, and that enables cities to develop a plan based around their existing baseline work, which obviously we've done, but then also starts to more fundamentally break it down into chunks, so you can see how your action will contribute towards it. It's a very powerful tool, and it's something that we're very keen to look at and understand how this is working elsewhere. As I say, it's only just recently started to be applied in the UK, but it's great because actually what it starts to do is enable you to say, well, if one organisation's taking all its fleet and switching it all to electric, or if another business in the city is taking this action, you can then start to build that up, and it's very visual. It's something that's quite powerful that people can see, using a monitor and see actually what's happening across the city and get a sense of that. So I think that would be something like that would be a really powerful way of being able to both present the challenge, but also to see, well, if I do that action as an organisation, that's what my action will do to reduce the carbon emissions and take us closer to 2030.
Can I again just remind pithy answers, please?
Apologies, Chair.
Tim.
Mine are sort of more, you talk about a trial of refuse trucks. We're talking about a trial. Is that going to become permanent? Where's the evaluation, so that in terms of electronic trucks, are we going to keep them on, or was it we just had been temporarily loaned them? I don't know. Energy recovery facility. Obviously, there's going to be, during the carbon reduction plan, I think it comes to the end of its lifespan. What plans have we got in place? I mean, technology has advanced a lot more in energy from waste, and what plans have we got for that? Have we entered any initial discussions with any third parties for that? And also, one of the things that I'm keen on is looking at how we perform at the moment. And for instance, we're very poor in electric charging facilities for electric vehicles. And for instance, down Parker's Lane down here, the electric charging point has been out of action for a year. How can we encourage people to make the switch if we can't even keep the electric charging facilities we've got open when we've got them?
Okay, pithy question, pithy answers to that. The electric bins, well, I was going to say they're ours, they're Veolia's, but they are our wagons, and we're keeping them. And yes, we will roll them out once we get them going. Sheffield's a great test bed because we've got our bin wagons going on motorways and up steep hills as well as along valleys. If it works here, it works anywhere. But yes, it is getting there, and we're making progress on that. We are constantly in discussion with Veolia to see what we can do about the incineration plant and how we repurpose that. And we're constantly looking at what government are giving us in terms of waste streams and such like. Mark, do you want to pick up some of the questions there? And I'm trying to be pithy and quick, Mick, sorry.
It's just that I've got a long list of questions.
Yeah.
Sorry, just on the electric vehicle recharging programme, I mentioned very briefly in the presentation that there was £100 million around the Connecting Sheffield programme. There's work that's going on at the moment to increase the number of rapid chargers in the city. I think there's 30 at the moment that have been planned. And then there are further chargers that will be planned because clearly, given the expected demand and as you say, that's already there in some regards, we need to make sure that we've got more charging facilities across the city.
Okay, Tim.
No, just the last bit was because obviously we've got some charging points that have been out of action for a year. It was just the question of how do we keep them? How are we monitoring to make sure that those that we've got, and as capacity increases, that they are in use, are kept in use, because it's pointless for people who've got electric vehicles then to find out that they actually can't charge them because we've got a large number. It's a bit like the old proverbial phone boxes in the pre-phone box in the pre-mobile phone days, when you might have technically a load of phone boxes for people to be able to use, but a lot of them were out of use. How are we going to make sure that we keep all our electric charging facilities in use?
That is certainly part of the Connecting Cities framework that's ongoing. So not only are we looking to enhance the number of chargers we've got, pushing our numbers closer to 300 very rapidly, but there will be stuff about maintenance and looking forward to keeping them going. Mark, yeah?
You have a plan.
Yeah, all I was going to add is, sorry, Chair, all I was just going to add is it's clearly identifies a very important area as well, because not all of those charges around the city will be owned by the council or managed on our behalf. And this is where I think, again, that question around just transition, if it's driven by the market and they're installing charges where they know there's latent demand or where there's going to be, it means that other places where we want to see them won't happen. And also the challenge around making sure that they are maintained and that they are kept fully working is again part of that approach around making sure that we've got those partnerships, that we're having those conversations with people and we're actually shaping that plan rather than having someone doing it to us.
Mike. Where are you, Mike?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, a couple of observations and a couple of questions. When I looked at the graphs going back to 2005, a lot of these things have happened as a matter of course. There's been no proactive aim to try and reduce CO2 emissions. So, for example, the steel industry has become a finishing product supply in Sheffield. There's no more melting shops, they're virtually gone, which are the heavy energy users. Domestic gas electricity with fuel efficient boilers and the move to LED lighting and stuff like that has had a major impact in energy use there. But my big question is around, Mark Jones has mentioned this a couple of times, is around national initiatives. In terms of the national initiative, do we understand what impact that will have on CO2 emissions in this city by 2030? And therefore, do we understand what the difference will be in terms of what the gap is that is left that we have got control over to try and reduce, if you understand my meaning? So things like new build in homes is no gas supplies now. It has to be all electric, ground and air source power supply, energy supplies. So are we doing that analysis? Are we getting our heads around that? Do we understand the gap? And do we understand what we have to do to make that up? That's my first question. Second question relates to the active travel. It's a long way from the nether regions of High Green to the city centre. There's not a lot of active travel going on at all, I can assure you. But this has a bearing on the local plan. How much impact are we having in terms of climate change in determining where we build our houses? Because if you want to get active travel, then you do more and more city centre construction of housing developments and reduce the amount that's going to be on the outskirts of the city. So have we done those sorts of calculations to determine what the impact will be on CO2 emissions by having a far better, and at the moment we've got a very rigid set of options. Are we really having a good look from the climate change perspective on how we develop our 40,000 homes over the next 10 to 15 years?
Thank you, Mike. The local plan, the current consultation that's ongoing now, is very much predicated on the city centre centric process, and climate change is very much part of those questions in terms of sustainability and ecological diversity within those developments. But you've mentioned something that's really quite pertinent. In High Green, it's not the easiest thing to cycle in from there. Even with an electric bike, it is still a bit of a journey. So we do need to do more around focusing on a 15-minute city where everyone can live in a locality and get everything that they need and live sustainably. And you know what? When they do want to travel, that there are public transport options to help people move around the city, because I don't want people just to kind of stay within their locality. Everyone's got to have the freedom of move, and we need to enable that. And that is part of our considerations going forward, how we do that and what we do. The government proposals and what's going on, that is very much part of the horizon scanning that we're doing, and that will need to keep being refreshed as government comes up with new things. It's not helped by government flim-flopping around. I don't want to go down the point scoring, but say you're going to take gas out of all new builds by 2023 and then reneging on it almost overnight, doesn't help. So we have to take everything coming from government, frankly, with a pinch of salt. But that's just part of the course. But yes, it is very much part of our considerations and our modelling and our planning as to what government policies are, and that's part of the business as usual assumption line going forward. Yeah, Mark, is there something you want to add to that?
And well, just to say, I think that covers the point around the business as usual scenario, and obviously the other work is looking at this decarbonisation pathways, is looking to see what are the levers that we have as a council, what do we need to do working with others in the city, and then actually what does that leave us with, and where does that need, for example, government input, and where are some of those national policies in a sense not enabling us to move as quickly as we need to, and what can we do? So yes, that is very much the work that's been undertaken. The only other thing was just around the decarbonisation that's happened over the last decade or so, and it is that you're right in that some of that is almost happened by accident, in that although I wouldn't necessarily refer to it as accident, I think it's more that, for example, businesses, you're right, steel companies have looked at changing processes, and some of that's been driven by cost initiatives, but ultimately that's about saving energy. And I think that's really where a lot of these initiatives will continue to be about actually what are the other benefits that will save energy, that will save costs, but also reduce carbon emissions and protect jobs.
Okay, Mike. Kate MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to see from the reports the number of initiatives that we've already got in place, so that's really good, and also the amount of data that we now have to provide a baseline analysis. So my sort of question really is, I mean, there's a risk of paralysis by analysis. And I'm sort of getting very restless now in terms of not just identifying and taking advantage of opportunities to decarbonise, but driving decarbonisation across the city. and then particularly through a joined up approach and an action plan for the city. Can you give me some idea about when we're likely to achieve that? Because at the moment it seems a bit fragmented. We've got a lot of commitment, blah, blah, blah. So rather than keep on discussing the evidence, which I'm very into evidence-based policy making, but I'd really like a bit more information about how we're going to get this joined up approach and what the timeline is in terms of starting to really drive it rather than potentially react to it and look for opportunities. And just before I shut up, Chair, I'd like to come back on the record to flag up an opportunity to come back on the recommendations.
Yeah, yeah. I've got one or two words to say about those myself, but can I just interject on the back of what Kate's just said? You mentioned something a little earlier called the final report. Now, what's in the final report? It would be helpful to know what's in that, because I'm with Kate on this issue. We've seen all of these figures before. We're talking about stuff that's happened in the past. What I don't get a sense of is what's going to happen in the future and what's going to be the game changer. We need something in that final report, in my view, that is a game changer.
Sorry.
Go on, Kate. It's okay.
No, I was going to, like, you know, I think we're singing from the same hymn sheet, but it would be good to get clarification whether the final report is actually about the analysis rather than actually about the action. So I think both of those need to be clarified.
Yeah. Well, I would hope it's about action, not more analysis. But there you go.
Yeah, okay, I agree.
So okay. Actually, the final report will contain the pathway and elements of that. So don't get me wrong, there will be highlighting significant amounts and gaps where it is there. I'll let Mark come in and talk on some of that stuff. But actually, what it does do is it gives us the evidence and it gives us the compelling arguments for why we have to do stuff as opposed to that we should think about doing it. Mark, do you want to pick up work packages 3A and B and just talk as briefly?
Does it tell us the stuff that we're going to do? Not the compelling reason for it, but does it tell us the stuff we're going to do?
It attempts to do both, Chair. What it aims to cover is the compelling reason and some of the wider benefits that these approaches will bring, whether it's across housing, whether it's across transport, whether it's how we work with industry, and breaking it down into that detail. But what it will do is also set out the actions that we need to undertake, both as a council, but also with other organisations in the city. So I think there's, as Mark said, there's two parts to it. There's one which is the city decarbonisation, which is what do we need to do as a city? What's the role of the council and others? And then there's a specific report which sets out what we need to do as an organisation, as Sheffield City Council, in order for the council to achieve zero carbon by 2030 in all its operations. So what do we need to do across our housing? What do we need to do with our transport? What do we need to do with our buildings and facilities in order to be able to achieve that?
Well, then whose dog is it?
I think Denise is being eaten by a dog.
Had enough of Councillor Oxley the other day with his dog. Anyway.
So yes. Basically, there will be a series of absolute things that we'll need to do, and to be honest with you, I think the first and foremost is going to be retrofitting of council stock houses in terms of insulation, and also energy production and sustainability of energy supplies within them. That is something I think we need to prioritise as an authority.
Well, as an authority, but as a city, I think most of the difficulties in terms of housing are with private housing. But
yes.
Chair, can I come back on that? Timeline? What's the timeline? This is urgent. We all want to get on with it. So when's this all going to be ready and when we're going to have an opportunity to discuss it?
Whenever these next recommendations will be ready to discuss in the new year, whenever you can bring it back and fit us in if you want.
Okie doke. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Steve Aries.
Thank you, Mick. I was looking well, my questions are really about integration with the COVID recovery plans. And looking at, I was watching Mark Whitworth's slide presentation, and the one where he mentioned the Green City Partnership Board. I didn't see it on there. Perhaps I missed it. I didn't see on there any health representation. Now, I think that it's crucial, and I know we're coming on to the recommendations. If we're looking at a cross-party committee and all of us in our scrutiny roles taking it back and making sure that climate change is part of our agenda, that health is represented in and amongst that. I was reading the World Health Organization had produced a manifesto which talked about how integration with COVID recovery plans, and the subtitle is Prescriptions and Actionables for a Healthy and Green Recovery. And so I think that we have a role here, not just as a council, but also it covers all our activities, as very much COVID has done. It impacts on all of our activities, not just as a council, but as a city. And so the partnership working, I believe, is crucial to that. And examples that have come out, and I think there was an article in the British Medical Journal, was the way that Milan and Paris had committed to make their COVID recovery policies and what they'd done in terms of sustainable infrastructure in response to COVID, to make them permanent. And I think there's a key role for health and health professionals to play, not just in terms of advocacy, but in terms of research and development. I just wondered whether you could respond on how we involve the obvious linkages with health and climate change with, in practical ways going forward.
Absolutely. Climate change will impact on those with respiratory issues. It's going to make it harder for people to live. But there's also a massive role for the health providers within Sheffield and Chesterfield to decarbonise what they do, their supply chain and how they work. And I understand that the CCG has made that statement just recently, that they are doing that. They're following, I think, a similar plan by possibly Birmingham, where they've said that they'll look to make their estates as energy production across their estates with solar panels and such like. Yes, those anchor organisations, those big bodies need to be there. And the CCG is present on our board, isn't it, Mark? I'm trying to remember who it is at the moment now.
Zach Murray.
Zach Murray, yes. Yes, that's it, yeah. So they are on the board, and they are feeding into this agenda, absolutely, and we couldn't achieve it without them, because we'll need all of Sheffield to take the path with us.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, unmuting.
I like the beard.
I was going to say.
Yeah, it's just I've been poorly and lazy, so just that's the honest answer. So I'm aware of time, so I'll just ask two questions. The first is just really, has the council reviewed its investment strategies, procurement policies, and its wider supply chain to account for the climate emergency? And then secondly, so that the Tyndall report didn't take account for the local food system, largely because of the carbon accounting model that Mark's referred to earlier, and how that deals with transport, and that being one of the largest sort of carbon elements of it. But if we look at it, I guess, more holistically than just what is accountable to Sheffield. So my family were members of a local community farm. The majority of our veg comes from it. We communally raise pigs that travel 2 miles from the farm to the abattoir, and then 1 mile from the abattoir to my freezer, which is a lot less than even using British farms, let alone when we talk about food transported from abroad. So it's an area that can have a massive impact on carbon reduction. It wouldn't reflect in our number because of the way it's accounted for. I guess in the same way that accountants shift money around from column to column on a spreadsheet. So I think that developing a local food chain is actually quite an important step to tackling the global climate emergency. It will require a deliberate leadership push. So would the council consider a local food growing strategy to encourage entrepreneurship and other food growing initiatives, which would align things like business support, the development of an incubator, the availability of public land, possibly financial support, and then the alignment of council and public sector partner procurement policies so that we end up having a market locally for the food that we would produce and tackle climate change with.
Yeah. Thanks, Ben. I think the beard looks really good, actually. So just buttering you up there just a little.
My wife doesn't agree, but thanks.
We do already have policies in place that are through the ethical procurement policies that we already operate through, which include things like making sure that there's a local tender for significant contracts, so that we can make sure that we reinvest in our communities and actually build that infrastructure and that sustainability closer to home, so we can shorten those supply chains. In terms of locally produced food and everything else, I think absolutely yes. It comes back to that investment in our communities and the community wealth building elements of it. When I've been to Rotherham, for instance, to do flood planning and look at the responses to last year's flooding issues that we faced, I was struck by the fact that Rotherham existed as a market town, and it's not. We have far too long become disconnected from our food, the production, the manufacturing and the consumption of it. We do the consumption bit, but we don't do the 4 bits. And maybe that's why we don't value food as much as we should do as a society. Maybe that's why so much food goes to waste. If we wasted less, we'd massively reduce our carbon impact assessment there. So actually, yes, I am very much supportive of what you're suggesting there, that we do need to have better cooperatives, we do need to have better connections to our food, and you know what, if you've got some sausages going spare from those pigs, let me know and I'll come around and get them when COVID permits. Yes, Mark, is there something you want to add to that?
I think the only other thing is just to add that we will be, obviously as this evidence base and the other work that's coming out of it is developing, we're having those conversations internally about actually how we embed this into all our approaches. And one of the things that has been taken up recently is actually putting a question in. It's a very simple thing to start with, but putting a question into a mandate for business cases to start the project at the very outset, asking the project manager to consider what's the environmental and climate change impact of that. That's where we're then building on this other tool, which will provide more guidance, and then actually then starting to embed that. So as Mark said, there's work that's already been undertaken, but we're not resting on that and just leaving it at that. There's further work which we recognise we do need to do, and we'll be trying to drive that through the corporate processes, through that impact tool, and through then monitoring the success of that.
Okay, Ben. Right, Jim Steinke, a bloke with a proper beard.
I was about to comment on that, Chair, really. I mean, I'm not sure I'd describe Councillor Cowan as a beard, but anyway, 2 related questions. I'll try and be as brief as I can. The first is really about presentational issues. If you were an anxious 14, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old at the moment about future of the world, the climate's kind of irreparably damaged, etc., or possibly, what kind of message are we giving at the moment? Because what worries me at the moment is that we are pretty inward looking about all this. Yes, we clearly need to tidy up the website, and we clearly need to kind of get some kind of public consultation, but I worry that we're not really kind of giving a kind of a reassuring message to people who may be really quite anxious, or maybe there isn't a reassuring message we can give at the moment. But it just feels at the moment that we need to come in targeting messages at younger people who are, who prior to COVID were regularly outside the town hall. And yes, potentially, that would have been a narrow range of people, But I do think that we need to kind of look at how we kind of, coming out of COVID, give better messages again. Related question is that a lot of the discussion so far has been around, you know, that somehow tackling climate emergency is good for you, and it clearly is. But what we're less so at the moment is recognizing that there's a pain involved in this. You've got to stop doing what you're doing. I mean, the reality is current car use, current meat consumption is not sustainable in the longer term. We in the sense that we know that we've got to do something like that. I think we're still being too polite. You said about earlier, Ian, about you know, politely telling people not to use their, you know, maybe not to use their cars. I think we're kind of getting beyond that really at the moment. I just think we need to give heavier messages. I'd welcome people's view about how we give those kind of messages.
Could I just interject again? I mean, I agree with you, and that is the main reason I asked the question about the final report, because that should have in it some of the things that were the kids and everybody else for that matter is wanting to hear. And the other point I'd like to make is about the conversation that is going to be had with the people of the city. It can't be a conversation like the one that's taking place this morning, because if you do, they'll all fall asleep or they'll walk out the door. Now, I understand the need to explain the detail and the logic behind certain decisions and why we're doing this, and the numbers behind the danger and the numbers behind the pollution. But you can't have a conversation like we've had this morning with the general public, because it just won't work. So there has to be another method of getting over the message that doesn't involve graphs, numbers, etc., etc.
I absolutely agree on that element. The engagement with the public and how we communicate this is going to be critical. There's some amazing work already out there that we can look at that's been done by partners within the city, such as the People's Palace, where people can go along and engage in artworks, in constructive places where they're looking at what the things should be. To an extent, for me, sometimes we put the evidence base at the front, but the question for me has to be is what do you want the city to look like going forward? Do you want us to be buffered against the impacts of climate change? Do you want the city to look better, and what does that look like? I think those aspirational bits need to be forming in there, and from the feedback from our public as to what they want the city to look like and how they want to conduct their lives, we can then say, well, these are the options available to you, and this is what that looks like. And we need to have those obvious. Yes, it's not going to be easy to do. We need to do that. We need to have those conversations. We need to take people with us, because otherwise it'll be a case of you've put in a cycle lane and I can't drive down here as quickly as I want to. What were you playing at? Are you stupid? We can't keep having those conversations. We need to change it, and we need to change that dialogue. Engagement, and with the youth, you know what, we currently have a youth parliament. Is that doing all it could be? I'd like to see that youth parliament at least have an adjunct, or at least another parliament, which is a climate youth parliament, where our children get to tell us adults to get off our backsides and start delivering the future that they want us to see. I think that's got to be part of this, because ultimately we're doing it for future generations, not just us.
Jim, do you want to say anything else?
I accept all that, but it's still, I think you expressed it very well, Nick, in terms of what I was trying to get over. We need to kind of partly reassure people that we are doing something, and secondly, we need to give a clearer message that it will have an impact on you. It's not business as normal in terms of getting post-COVID back to your life, if we're serious about, you know, moving on from COVID to a climate emergency. There needs to be clear messages, what you do to make a difference.
Yeah. Julie.
Thanks, Chair. I think we've had a really good session this morning, and I just want to try and pick up on one or two loose ends that are just still floating around for me. I think COVID may be part of the solution, because we all need to look at our lifestyles public transport in my area, in lots of our areas, is a huge issue, and we know that needs improving greatly. But I think that won't improve unless we change our lifestyles. You know, people, the long hours culture is a prime example of that. And I've been as bad at that as many people in the past. And certainly if I'm working long hours at work, I'm not going to be waiting for public transport to get home. I'm going to be getting in my car and getting home as quickly as I possibly can. And I think there's lots of little subtle issues like that that have impacts on the wider issues that we're trying to deal with, that we need to be cognizant of. So it's not just about trying to get people to think about, you know, do I need to use public transport, but is their mindset and their lifestyle allowing them to be able to do that as well? So I think there's some issues there that we need to look at. I'd also like to pick up on the point that Kate made. I think she made a very valid point in relation to how we are working and where we are getting to with all of this. And so my question would be, are we happy that as a City Council, how we deal with this issue is right in terms of that it sits currently in your portfolio, Mark, and that then links into the recommendations? Because actually, shouldn't this be front and centre in everybody's portfolios? And I will be interested to know how the working relationship with other portfolio holders is, which then brings us on to the points that Ben made about, you know, budgets and financing and how all of that works. So I think there's some quite complex issues within this that we need to unpick and be clear about, because, you know, if we're dealing with the housing stuff, is that coming out of, you know, the housing budget, or is it coming out of your budget? How is that all working so that we're clear and can make sense of it all? So I think there's some questions there. And I think basically, you know, the recommendations, as you said, Chair, and Kate said, are really just far too woolly for me. They're not specific enough. They're not driving the agenda. And I do think that we need to think carefully about what we recommend at the end of this session today. Thank you.
Great.
Yep, thank you. Yes, there is a golden thread running through everything we're doing. I can assure you of that. Councillor Paul Wood is looking to see what he can do on the HRA budget. But there is a lot of stuff that the vast majority of the housing in Sheffield isn't actually ours. And we do need to make sure we can get better initiatives going forward as to make sure that those houses that we don't own are fitted and made future-proof and future appropriate. Mark, is there anything you want to add?
I think, well, just sort of following on, I suppose it links more to the points made previously by Councillor Steinke, but it crosses over to the points made now about the recommendations and how we work going forward. I agree. I think the message and how this is communicated to the public and the sessions that we have through that wider engagement need to be very different, and that's the plan in terms of those conversations on technical, on sort of into the detail, because actually the solutions that Mark's just highlighted around not all the homes in the city belong to the council. We've got 40,000 homes, but out of the remaining 200 or so thousand homes in the city, we've got to find ways of working with people to be able to do some of these changes, whether it's as a householder who can afford to do that, or whether it's somebody who can't afford to do that, or whether you're in a rented property. So how do we work with registered landlords, and how do we work through some of the other federations that are in the city to try and bring them on board to that challenge? And I think it's that sort of leadership approach that will be, which will be outlining in that report, and the approaches that we need to take to actually lead and take action in the council, but where we also need to show the way and identify how people can go about doing this and provide them with some assurances that actually we've got a plan and there's something here for the city. And as others have pointed out, there are some big challenges, and we're asking people to change the way that they currently do things, which may not go down and be as well received as some of the benefits. But it's certainly about having that conversation with people on some of these challenging issues.
Okay, that's the final questioner. Kate, you did indicate that you wanted to look at the recommendations. Is there any way we can get them up on the screen so that we can have a look at them?
I can.
Is anybody clever enough to do that? Because I'm not.
Mark had them on his last slide, so Mark, have you got that handy to put up?
Yeah, if you just,
They're the recommendations in the scrutiny report, aren't they?
yeah, I hope so. It should be.
Otherwise, I'll have a go from my
I'll
side.
just try sharing this now, so hopefully this all works for you. Let's have a look. Hopefully that's worked.
Kate.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to add another recommendation, and that is that we want to see an early report which outlines, which responds to the urgency of the need for us to respond to climate change. And I'd like to see the timeline in it, and I'd like to see an action plan. Obviously, we understand that, I'm talking to my suggestion now. Obviously, we understand that there's lots of discussion that has to take place. We haven't had the citizens panel, all of that. But I am so concerned that we spend all our time discussing it, that we don't get on with doing stuff and we don't take on the leadership challenge. So I would like to see some of those components which people have raised today in this meeting in a further report that comes to scrutiny. And you did say that January would be a potential possibility. I can't remember how that will fit in with our work programme. But I do think it's important that we are satisfied that we're addressing this with appropriate urgency and with an appropriate focus on action. So my recommendation is that we have a further report in this that responds to some of the comments that we've actually had at today's meeting.
Yeah, we want something that's got substance to it, don't we? That's what
exactly.
We want.
So you can, if you can come up with the wording and a recommendation which actually enshrines that. That would be my first.
I'm sure
that's
Alice,
an additional recommendation. And I'd like to comment. Can I comment as well at the same time?
Yeah.
Unless you want me to stop then and other people to discuss that. I've got comments on the rest of the recommendation.
Well, finish what you've got to say, and then I'll bring other people in.
Thank
but
you.
I can't see anybody else at the moment. So you carry on, and then we'll take the screen away, and then.
Thank you. On the third recommendation, I am happy to have this. This has to be a cross-party approach. My question really is about the best way to achieve that, because I'm a bit concerned that there's going to be a proliferation of groups and bodies discussing things and so on. And so if we are going to support that, to be honest, I think scrutiny could fulfil that role, but we need to have clarity of roles and purpose if we're going to set up a separate, another committee, basically. I'd be happy for scrutiny to take on that role, overview and scrutiny management committee, that's cross-party, that would be fine with me. But I think we'd really have to, I'm just a bit concerned about setting up another committee, because we've got scrutiny involved in it, we're going to have cabinet, we've got partnership, we've got, there'll be all sorts of groups around, and I think you can you can work out from my previous comments. I think the focus should be on action and not necessarily on everybody discussing things ad infinitum. So that's just my comment on that. I'm in favour of a cross-party approach, but I'm not yet convinced that setting up a separate committee is the best way to achieve that.
No, I tend to agree with that, Kate, because there is already an issue of capacity amongst our officers to service meetings. So I don't see why I think it's quite possible to absorb this sustainability committee into the work of perhaps this committee, because I would expect it started here. The council recommendation was that we should be basically supervising the work. So I don't see why that can't be incorporated into what we do as an overview committee. I was going to say something else, but it's gone. It's my age. Yes, if you could take the screen down so I can see other people, please. I know Tim Huggin has already indicated that he wants to speak. So Tim, off you go.
Without looking at the amendment now, I was looking at what Kate said, and quite frankly, it would be a question of, because they're talking about putting, the scrutiny chairs And so if this committee was able to take it on, it'd be a part of it to take on that bit where we're challenging the other committees, but then it would just be a slight renaming of this committee to do that, to pull it forward. So it'd be Overview and Management, Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee, or Overview and Scrutiny Sustainability Management and Sustainability Action, or something like that committee, that so that it's very clear where the buck stops in terms of making sure that the council who's responsible in the council for pushing the climate emergency agenda that we have, if this committee feels that that's the way we can take it forward, because that's what it has to be. It doesn't need to be somewhere else, because Mick, we could give you enormous amounts of work by giving the 4 of you meeting and then another committee, and then who's responsible? Nobody.
Yeah, I agree. I think given the piece of work started here, it might as well stay here, and that way there is someone who is responsible for it, rather than it get lost in the system and fragmented. I agree with you, Tim. I haven't got a problem with that. Right. Are we? I don't agree, says Alison Teal. Tell me why you don't agree, Alison Teal. Can't hear you.
Because there's nothing more important than this, and so it needs its own committee, because there's so much work to be done, and other committees can't really add this to their existing portfolio. It's an overarching thing, as you said. It's in every other sphere. Every sphere of life is affected by this, and so we really do need to have a group of people who are doing more than just scrutinizing what's already going on. We need a committee that's more dynamic and actually initiating programs and helping get projects off the ground and liaising with the community and local businesses. I think it's a massive task. I think we're not putting nearly enough time into this. We've got one officer, poor Mark, who's doing a brilliant job, but he's one person, and we need to put a lot more people into this. And if we can't afford to employ new officers, we need to use the skills that the councillors have got. We need to, it's just essential, as far as I'm concerned, that we create a new group.
Well, I'm not precious about it, to be honest, as long as it gets dealt with. Can I get some other opinions other than mine?
Could I come, Chair, if possible?
Yes.
Because I'm really mindful that scrutiny isn't just about scrutiny; it's also scrutiny and policy development. So if this board was to have an oversight relevant element of that, or was to also invite others to sit on a sub panel within this, then I could see that working. It's yes, there may be a greater requirement for Alice and her colleagues to support this, and that's a decision I think we should look to take. So though I do think that we are a scrutiny committee, I think that's sometimes a misnomer. I think the policy development bit should be maybe promoted here within this bit. So I'm not precious how it happens. It'd just be really great to see it happen.
Okay. Can I put a suggestion that the idea was, as I understood it, that we would have a further discussion in January with a significant paper from both from Mark and Mark. Can we?
And Victoria, sorry.
And Victoria. I'm sorry, you've been so quiet, Victoria, down there, that I'd forgotten about you. I apologise. That we have a look at that paper and then make a decision as to what happens next once we've seen that paper. That's an attempt at a compromise, and I think it might be slightly better informed decision once we've seen the other paper. Right, hang on a minute while I have a look who wants to talk. Ian.
So just before you modified your proposal, Chair, that could be a reasonable proposal, but whatever we decide to do in January, we need to set about doing it quickly. That would be my observation on that. It's on the issue about this committee. I can live with that, because actually another committee, my initial reaction is that starts to cross all the scrutiny boards. I do agree that this should be on every scrutiny board agenda, and this one as a standing item, but then you have to do coordination on policy, you have to work through cabinet and officers. I can think that actually your initial suggestion, which I can consider further in January, but it was an attractive one, and from Kate's contribution as well. So I try it, but
okay.
I guess now I'm about to say that if we're going to leave it till we see what the action report is, yeah, all right. It's a delay already, isn't it? But
make your mind up.
Decision. It won't do any harm.
Johnny.
No, go with you.
Cheers. Johnny.
Thank you. I was just going to support what Kate and Tim had said, that this would be an appropriate place to coordinate all the stuff coming from the other scrutiny panels, who can clearly be doing the policy development role that we've said. And let's say that's what's likely to happen, and that January's report will just confirm that, I suspect.
Right.
All right.
Okay.
So let's decide now, possibly, would be, because Kate's
Jim.
got a proposal.
Jim. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I really wanted to second your proposal, really. I do think that we need a kind of further report to really look at the terms that they can put forward, and it seems to me it makes sense to actually kind of consider that in January. That's all. I'm merely seconding it.
Thank you. Kate?
Thank you, Chair. I don't think the two things are mutually exclusive. That if we give a commitment now to overview and scrutiny, taking on that role, then we can discuss further in January how that would work. I suppose that's the way of linking. I think there's quite a lot of support for my original proposal, Chair, and I know you're trying to get a compromise, but in fact, I think there's only one person that's spoken against it. So I think we've got a reasonable consensus that this is a role for overview and scrutiny, but we still need to give some further thought, and I'm quite happy to do that. Not me personally, but I'm happy that we do that, and then finalise our proposals in January rather than just start to discuss it again in January. So take it on a stage further is what I'm suggesting, rather than stop. Yeah.
Right. I think you're agreeing with that we just go, we bring a paper on in January, and then we make the decision as to where this program sits in January. Yeah.
No, my suggestion was that I think there's a consensus about the right place being overview and scrutiny management. It's not consensus, but there's a majority are, want to do that, but we still need further. I think we need to give further thought to how that would work in practice, and that's what we finalise in January. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So we're already today we make that decision, but we still have further discussion about how.
Okay. Right. That's strange, because that's been the most difficult part of the meeting so far, which is a bit odd. I think we've got most people, I'm not sure that Alison is entirely happy with that idea, but most people are. So we're going to go with that, if that's okay. Yeah. Yes. Nobody's pulled a horrible face at me.
Mick, all I would add, and it picks up all the issues, is that you have that report, and I'm being a bit forward and cheeky here, but there's nothing stopping me as an officer, along with Laurie and Mark and Victoria, putting in some effort into what might be governance options, how it might look, so that kind of ticks off what Kate's saying in terms of coming in January with something a bit more. I mean, I'm, you know, putting my hand up to doing some work on this. That's fine. I'll get support for that. And I think then it picks up some of those other issues, and then you can have the conversation that actually, having heard all of this, what's in that plan? It is going to work. It isn't going to work. This is how it's going to work.
Okie dokie. Right. We'll go with that then. All right. Excuse me. I think we finished that item. Thank you very much for that. Is it work plan now? Is it work plan? Because I haven't got me. I've lost my other thing.
Yeah. Yes,
Work
it's the
plan
draft
hours.
work programme. Yes.
Yeah. It's moved
Chair,
on a bit now then, hasn't it? Because
sorry, Chair, do we give Mark and Victoria a chance to go and get some dinner?
of course you can.
Yes. Thanks, Mark and Victoria,
Ask him
for
if
support
he's
today.
paying.
Always paying, Mick. Always paying.
Thank you.
Cover me money.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone else.
I'll leave you
Cheers,
guys
Mark.
to get on with it as well. Thank you.
I
All
just,
that coffee has gotten to me.
we can carry on.
Do you need me,
Alice, do
Chair,
you want to
or- okay.
explain
Yeah. So
where we are?
work programme. It's page 176 of the papers. You've got a list in there in paragraph in section 2 of possible topics, which of course there are a few to add in now. And then you've got your meeting dates. So I was already going to update you on something else if I can, or Mick was, but also now, literally following on from that just now conversation, it seems to me like the primary thing you want for your 28th of January meeting is that sort of final report on climate change with some of the other options around the governance and etc. included in it. So I would suggest that seems to be what you want from what I've heard. There are other items. There was a suggestion of trying to have a look at Sheffield City Region in December. There's a bit more work needs to be done on what's the best way to make that work from a scrutiny perspective. But also, Mick, do you want to come in and mention?
I have had a suggestion from someone much higher up the food chain than I am, that a discussion in December about Brexit might be a good idea, and the council's preparedness for our impending exit from the European Union. It's a suggestion. I think it's an apt one. Quite timely, so I'm just testing people's opinions on that. It was strongly suggested to me that we might want to do that.
Couldn't we have something cheerful instead?
Well, I'll wear a red nose while I'm doing it. How's that?
We'll hold you to that, Mick.
I will do it. I will do it. Don't worry.
Minute that, someone.
It's recorded. Come on, let's have some reaction to that suggestion, please.
You had some thumbs up.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, they were thumbs, weren't they?
Yeah. You might want to ask if there's any thumbs down, but that's it.
Pardon?
You might want to ask if there's any thumbs down, but
No, I wasn't thinking of. I was thinking of another appendage. Kate wants to speak. Sorry, Kate wants to speak, and then
Thank you,
Jim.
Chair. I would like us to do something on food poverty. I think it's a really timely. It's really timely, actually, and it does cut across several. I know I've sort of messaged Ben about it, but we didn't have a chance to do that. But I wondered whether or not it might be that it might be something that Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee would want to take a lead role in, and if so, we could actually, under the aegis of that, have a small task and finish group or something like that. So it's a suggestion that we might want to give further thought to, but I just wanted to gauge the interest from other members of the committee.
Okay, Jim.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on what Alice was saying about relationships with the Sheffield City region. I accept that in terms of the immediacy of the Brexit discussions in terms of next month. But I would be worried about losing that, because I think one of the issues that's particularly come up in terms of the context of COVID is a bit about where we fit in with the city region, not just on the economic front, but the kind of wider spheres as well. So I'd like some kind of sense of timetable for that. And also, when I'm at it, certainly support Kate's proposal about food poverty. That would be good.
Okay, Sinead, I'll bring you back in a minute, Alice, because we need to try and.
Right.
Yeah.
Something, again, I don't know whether it's this committee or whether it would go to Denise's committee, but certainly about digital poverty, which is sort of the other big divide at the moment, particularly with so many children in and out of school, but also people being expected to work from home more, and how we actually make sure that people are properly equipped for this modern world that's, you know, falling on them very rapidly at the moment. Thank you.
Do you want to answer that, Denise? Do you think it is appropriate for yours?
I think it's more appropriate for our scrutiny board, wouldn't you say? Yeah, because it's economy, well-being, all covers, ticks all them boxes. So I will speak to the officers and get it on their work programme.
Okay.
Okay.
Alice, I mean, I'm not sure that I got an. Did I get an answer about Brexit? I think we agreed that.
I read it as you got a positive on the 17th
right.
of December.
Okay.
But there were lots of other issues, some of which I think are can be dealt with more in a work group way. Both digital poverty and food poverty, they're not completely news to my ears.
No.
Because we have had some officer discussions about some of these things. And I think task and finish groups probably sensible, certainly for food poverty, and OSMC taking a lead. So I thought, I read it that you did get a thumbs up for Brexit risk preparedness in December because it's just totally timely.
Okay.
All I'll say on the city region, I do know that there's some conversations going on quietly about other ways to make sure that is not lost, and that this council, you know, that all members have a way of getting into that and understanding that relationship, especially as Jim has pointed out. You know, it's got quite a strong connection with our COVID response.
Yeah, I want to know what they're spending my money on. I'm just wondering, is it feasible to have more because the list that we want to discuss is getting longer. Is it possible to have more than one item? Is it sensible to have more than one item on an agenda? Because I mean, today's is exceptional because it's it's serious stuff, isn't it? And I'm just wondering how I'm trying to squeeze probably a pint into a quart bottle, if you know what I mean, because of the resources and the number of meetings that we can't have, as it were. So what I'm looking at you, Alice, for inspiration.
Well, what I've jotted down is, I think my advice would be food poverty, OSNC take a lead, but definitely task and finish group, so it can be done offline with those who want to, with a cross-sectional from all the committees. I think Denise has agreed digital poverty fits with economics, so it goes into that agenda. Definitely January 28th for your report back from today's item, and the going forward in terms of a cross-party committee for climate change with the Brexit preparedness, as I say, on the 17th. That, for me, covers off certainly most of the things that have actually been said today, without the need for lots more meetings or a worry that things aren't going to get picked up. And in terms of the city region, I'm going to take that back and put it into the conversations that are being had about how best can Sheffield members have a look at the city region post devolution deal accepted now and in COVID. So I will take that away and come back with potential solutions for that.
Okay, right, thank you. I think the next item then is anything any of the chairs want to raise from their committees. Denise.
Thank you, Mick. Since we last had our overview, we've had 2 scrutiny meetings. The first one was from the
about the Sheffield City Trust and the leisure and the rationale on the reopening on various venues and the impact of COVID and their inability to generate income. The recommendation from that was that we set up a cross-party working group to help feed into the leisure strategy for the city. And so I've met with officers to put that in place. The second one was a call-in about the decision on Sheffield COVID Business Recovery Plan. It was a very enlightening report, and I think it having people there, having the officer there, and the Chamber of Commerce, the chair of the Chamber of Commerce, Alexis Karachi, it was more enlightening listening to them and the plan. The chair of the chamber spoke highly of the partnership and the steering group that's been set up, and the support for the independent businesses and the importance of working together. So it was very interesting. And the committee concluded and recommended that a report be brought back in the future to see how the plan is working. Thank you.
Thank you. Any of the other chairs wish to raise anything? Kate?
Just to say that we've been meeting monthly with the exception of August, and it's actually really tough in terms of the cycle. So we had to cancel August meeting just because a report that was promised, somebody was off and stuff like that. So when you're working at that pace, you don't have that much flexibility. So we've had meetings on, we had a great discussion on the latest position on track, put my teeth back in, track, test and isolate at our last meeting. We're looking at general practice at our next one. We've been looking at mental health. So we're right on the money in terms of the issues that are really concerning local people at this point in time around COVID.
Okay. Our committee at Children's has had 2 recent meetings on the subject of COVID and the effect it's had on the education system. The first one was from the perspective of those who educate our children, and the second one was from the children themselves who are educated by those people and through the youth council. They were both very interesting. There was some communality between the issues that were raised, but the perspective was quite often different. So I think the next stage is for us as chair, deputy chair and policy officer to meet with the kids from the youth council and put a paper together that we are going to send to various people for them to comment and hopefully act on. Okay. And just let me have a look who's on here. Kate's going because she's got to have food for her diabetes, I presume. Alison. I think you've sent that to everybody by mistake, haven't you? Yeah, okay. Anybody else? I think Ben may have gone. That's it in terms of the agenda for today, except I believe for the next meeting, which is December the 17th. And I will wear a red nose. Okay, is that it? Can we go
How
now?
will we tell, Mick?
I'll have an arrow pointing towards it. Oh, thank you.
We'll hold you to that.
No, I'll wear it, don't worry. Right, that's it then. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Cheerio, everyone.
Thanks.